Hello and welcome back to Miniverse, where today we are delving back into the world of Warhammer and attempting to make my biggest and best diorama yet. So let's get started. So after breaking my old and trusty hot wire cutter, I had to revert back to the old barbaric ways of a knife and chisel. So I started to build this labyrinth of foam that will one day be a path to the most travelled. In serious though, I do love looking back at this wired ting, and it really does show how you can really make anything out of a little bit of foam. Crazy. When making these type of dioramas, you kind of want to make the basic outlines, and with this rough shape now made, I know it looks like a lot of mess, but trust me, after this clay, mwah, it'll look pretty good. And speaking of clay, how have I never used this clay before? Here's my one tip to new and old hobbyists. If you have never used Daz air drying clay, that's not sponsored, but it's really cheap and it's really fun to use, and I cannot express how satisfying it is to get down and dirty with some clay. When I was sculpting with the clay, I made sure to wet the edges to get a smooth blend into the foam, and smooshed it into the foam so it doesn't fall off later after it's dried. Now it's time to make the cliff edge. I did some resin rocks into the clay to give it that realism and add some diversity amongst the rocks to make it look, well, more like a cliff. Another helpful tip I can give is that when making a diorama like this, try and not make everything like a right angle. Try and make some slopes and gradients to make the diorama feel less boxy, especially if you're filling in most of the sides. After carving more cliffs, I used some texture paste to add more texture to the rock surfaces, so it's not just smooth and shiny. Now it's time to get onto the centerpiece model. While this Necron looks fine and dandy, I wanted to add a little bit more of a menacing pose, and to make that happen, I drilled and clipped off his legs to reshape them to better fit the diorama. I also added some battle damage with a knife and drill. I also replaced one of his eyes by adding the eye onto a guitar string and placing that back in there. Using green stuff, I then reattached his legs and held him in place overnight to dry. The next morning, I then reattached his other legs. Now, let's make a tree. To make the tree, I chopped off some roots I found in the woods and chose the best ones that looked kinda like some tree bark. I then drilled and glued small roots and twigs onto the tree to add as little branches, before then adding sea moss to act as all the little branches. When adding these branches, make sure to add a lot of super glue, as the last thing you want is it breaking off while painting or adding flock, so be warned. To make the leaves, I delicately added watered down Mod Podge or PVA glue all over the branches and sprinkled fine green flock on top. Now, this is a really time consuming process, but in the end it does look great. So overall with this process I did that twice before adding some nosh leaves on top. Thankfully this step is much easier as the flock will absorb all the glue much easier. But one thing you do need to make sure is to hold it carefully because it will get pretty heavy before the glue dries. With the tree now done, let's paint some miniatures. Now I do love yellow robots, and I think this comes from Borderlands 2, but I cannot get enough of the yellow look on robots, and this is exactly how I'm going to paint my Necrons. After base coating him in a dark steel colour, I painted all the chosen armor panels white, so I can then apply the Imperial Fist's yellow contrast paint on top, making sure it doesn't pool and has a nice flat colour to it. Once this is fully dry, I slap on my favourite wash in the world, dark brown enamel. I pour this all over the miniature, but prioritising the yellow armor panels to dirty it up and give it a slight change in colour. After a quick green shade underneath the miniature, I added striking scorpion green to the eyes and dabbed a tiny bit of water onto it to add a glowing effect. Next, I used a new product I really do love, VMS Smart Clay, which I'll go into in another video because all that's about to get covered up, so that'd be a bit of a waste. After dry brushing the rocks white, it's time to add some colour. Here is the reference images I'm going to use to achieve this. This is actually a photo I took earlier this year when visiting King Arthur's castle in Tintagel. 10 out of 10, I fully recommend it. For the rocks, I started off with a warm grey and later on covered everything with a black wash and applied a dry brush of a lighter grey on top to make the highlights. This is a really nice and easy way to paint rocks, and it's definitely what I'll be doing in future. To achieve the moss, I used Dirty Down's moss, which honestly cannot be beaten when it comes to quick and easy moss painting. Now let's get some water on that bish. I mixed up some resin and poured some luscious blue into it. Afterwards, I poured it into the waterfall and the stream beneath. I always love a resin pour. Oh, so satisfying. Now, at this point I was torn between making this a forest diorama or a cool winter diorama, and it sat on my desk for about 2-3 days and I was pondering over it every day, but in the end I decided to go for a winter scene. Next, I applied some snow onto the tree by once again soaking all the leaves with glue and pouring snow flock on top. Later on, I actually gave it a quick spray of white primer on top as well to help with the snowy look. To do this, I used snow from AK Interactive, which I do not recommend. It is a waste of money. Just buy some spackle paste from your DIY store, it's the same thing. I then sprinkled snow flock on top. One thing I also used was snow sprinkles, also by AK Interactive, which I do recommend. That stuff is great, it looks like wet snow. As the diorama was nearly finished, it was time to paint the second miniature for the duel, but it looked like... So instead I painted 2 more little friends to help him along the way in this epic journey along the wastelands. But where are they going? That's for you, my friends, to make up. Let me know your thoughts in the comments where they might be travelling to. Make sure to like and subscribe, dislike if you disliked, and check out my previous Warhammer diorama if you liked this one. It's right there. It's right there on your screen. Click on it. Click on it. Click on it now. I dare you. Click on it.